Evening. Welcome to our midweek Bible study. We've been going through looking at the book of Ecclesiastes. This will be our third lesson. And so let's go and have a word of prayer and then we'll get started. Our most blessed and righteous Father, thank you so much for all that you do for us and what you have accomplished through your word. We pray that as we study this book of Ecclesiastes that we'd be able to look into what Solomon is trying to reveal to us and the wisdom that we can take and understand how our goals in life should be aligned with everything that is living and what we're doing connected to you, Father. Anything in this world without you is really vain and has no real value. We thank you, Father, for being able to have these precious words to where we can look at them and be able to encourage ourselves. We ask this in Jesus' name, amen. Okay, so last week we looked at the second lesson. It was a pursuit of pleasure, and that's kind of the idea. When we look at the book of Ecclesiastes, written by a man who had the ability to do anything he wanted. He had all the resources, he had the power, and when we look at him, he's at this point in his life, it seems, as we read this book, opens up with the idea that, everything is just a waste. And we get this phrases that we hear, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. And I want us to remember that word vanity, as he's being used, and you go back to the Hebrew, it's like very similar to when James says life is but a vapor. It's just, so when he says vanity, it doesn't mean like pride, vain, or, vanity in this sense is looking at the idea that what value? It has no real value. And it seems and when we talk about another word, under the sun, means in this physical world. So if we were to kind of modernize it, we would say something like, everything in this physical world really doesn't have any value. Now, it sounds like, man, are you sure about that? I mean, God created everything. It's beautiful. It's supposed to be perfect. It's exactly what he wants. But what he's going to show without God. Without God. And so that was kind of the overall introduction when we started the first one. The second one, we looked at this idea of the pursuit of pleasure. And it really is. If you think about it, what do you go after? Things that hurt? Really? What drives your day? What drives your life? The idea that you want to have displeasure? Or you want to enjoy things? You don't pick a restaurant by how bad they are, right? You pick a restaurant based on, oh man, the food is so good, right? So, and what about your clothes? You don't go to a store and look at your clothes and goes, man, that's the ugliest thing there is. I'm going to take it. It's going to make me look so ugly. No, you want beautiful clothes. Clothes are going to make you feel good, right? So pleasure. We're not just talking about some weird aspects to it, but the idea that everything in life, we're just fundamentally driven by around kind of the animalistic, pain and pleasure. If it don't feel good, I won't eat it. I won't do it. Even some foods. I remember that I used to think that tomatoes made me sick when I was really little. And it's all because I got into a fight with a babysitter and I refused to eat my tomatoes, probably why I don't eat them today. But I really did. I really thought that, so it repulsed me. I had something psychological that why I wouldn't eat tomatoes. And why? Because I didn't like them. They didn't make me feel good. So when we talk about pleasures, we're talking about the things in which we enjoy, the enjoyments of life. That's what we're kind of looking at. So I want us to kind of put it into our own cultural perspective and understanding. So last week we had looked at what we're calling the pursuit of pleasure. And there were basically four of them they talked about, pursuing. And we focused in on the first one, which was the idea of pleasure, then wisdom and folly, meaningful work, and power and wealth. And those are the kind of areas of our entire life in which we will go and we want to indulge or enjoy. And now there's two types. There's two types of pleasure. There's one that we call illicit, wrong type of pleasure. And there's licit, one that's appropriate. And all of the things in which we experience, God created us perfect. He wants us to have those experiences. He wants us to be able to enjoy life. But if they're done in a sinful way, then they're wrong. And the ones that are done appropriately are the ones that we can say are godly. They're the way God wants us to enjoy them, because this world was created for us. So there are aspects, everything from anger, crying, all the things that we experience and enjoy. If it's done appropriately, it's pleasurable and enjoyable. If it's done illicitly, then all it produces is guilt and shame. So it's kind of ironic, isn't it? It's kind of like a diet. You know that if you eat just a little bit of fudge, it's okay, it's good. But if you eat the whole bowl, you know that's wrong. You know it's bad for your body. And what does it give you? Guilt and shame. The other aspect about all of these pleasures that he's talking about, they're fleeting. You can't store them up and have a box of feel-good chocolate feelings, and reach over there and pull them out. They fleet, they go. And so every one of these pleasures that we do enjoy, whether they're right or wrong, they don't last. They will not sustain you. Why? Well, I have to keep going back to that restaurant to get good food, because as soon as I go home, in about 3 days, I go, man, I'd like some enchiladas again. Right? It didn't last. So all of them are fleeting. They don't accumulate. And so we are driven kind of by that positive and negative, stimulus, what they do for us. And so when we're living this life and we look, and a lot of times we hit a certain age where we look around and we go, what's it for? When you first are in your 20s and you're, get out of high school, you got dreams, it's like, wow, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do this. And and it drives, and you have a enjoyment of seeking after that. Everything that I've done, going through different schools or programs, it's like when I start out, I was hungry for it and enjoyed it and all that. And then all of a sudden you get the certification or the degree or whatever it is, and you get out in the real world, and after a while you go, ugh. That's why there's professional students, right? They just keep in school because, when they get out in the real world, it's like they lose that excitement, and they're just like, and so everything in life has that effect. And it's something we have to learn to be able to be productive and successful at. People who have addictions that are illicit, ones that are wrongful, that's part of the addiction. Is why? Because without God, that's the only place they're getting satisfaction from. And so you have sex addicts, you have drug addicts, you have alcoholics, you have all these addicts, addictions. I don't think we've been in a society of recent where we have had so many classifications of addictions. And I'll tell you, it's because there's no God in their lives. Now, that's part of it. Now, I'm not going to say that there's no genetic component. There is absolutely some, pathophysiology that contributes. And there are some people, it's kind of like, we jokingly will say what? Don't let the Irish do what? Drink. Yeah. Indians drink, right? And we don't, and it's not just a stereotype, is it? They have actually shown that it's genetic. So that's why I'm going to compromise. I'm going to say that, there are still some things. And there's people like me and my family, well, I can't eat chocolate like some of the skinny people can. It's not good for me. I have a disposition of just getting fat. So, and diabetes and other things like that. So I want to balance on here. So I'm not saying, that a lot of these things, but the fundamental thought is that a lot of these addictions are created a lot of times because God's not a part of the equation. And that's what he's bringing up. That's the whole point, is talking about the idea that without God, it's vanity. It really is. Paul even said, if there is no resurrection, let's just eat, drink, and die, because there's nothing else to do. You see what he's saying? He's almost saying what Solomon is saying. If you don't have God, then just be a drunkard, a pervert, do whatever you want to make yourself satisfied and just die, because that's all there is. And that's the atheist. That's the people who don't believe in God. That's right. And so they justify their moral behavior because they're not satisfied. They get no satisfaction in life outside of those things, and so they thrive on those, and so they have to normalize those, right? That's right. Oh, they're okay. Just as long as you don't hurt somebody. You're hurting your soul, So that's what we were looking at. So now, as we come into this, that's the thing about, pleasure's pleasurable, but like I said, it's fleeting. And so now he's going to look at the idea of living wisely and foolish. And so basically somebody who is using, let's go and kind of discuss a little bit. What is wisdom? Because I know a lot of people are going to be very, humble, and they're going to go, well, I'm not very wise. I'm not a wise man. I'm not a wise woman, So when we say living wise, what is wisdom then? And there's a difference, isn't there, between wisdom and intellect? So there's a difference between having knowledge and then appropriately using it. That's wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to take knowledge and then apply it correctly. So that's the thing, I've done a lot of YouTube mechanicking. I'm certified YouTube mechanic and medical doctor and many things, but there's been a lot of foolish things where I've had the knowledge and I walk out to the garage and then I just blow it up. It doesn't work. I had the knowledge, I watched the guy, but when I went out and tried to do it, I did it so wrong. But I had the knowledge. So wisdom is the ability to take that knowledge and then use it appropriately, usefully, versus the fool. When he's talking about somebody that's foolish, we're talking about somebody not paying attention. They're not using any knowledge, any wisdom. They're just living their lives. And things happen, well, it happens, You're going to go change a tire on a car, you just start taking off the lug nuts. You don't think about blocking the tires. You don't think about, there's a lot of things that, and they knew better. It's like I've never seen, I really started to see it the older I got, and I started seeing older people that I know had done some of these things. In other words, change tires and do some common sense things, and they just get hurt. As a paramedic going to a call, and I'm like, how'd you get your finger in that light socket? Come on, man. Really? You're how old? And you didn't know that electricity can kill? You wonder sometimes, and I'm not saying, but there's a part where there's the person who is living foolish. They're not circumvent. They're not aware of what's going on. They're not just oblivious, but they're purposefully oblivious. Somebody who thinks that they can sit and go out and just consume mass quantities of alcohol and not think that, when 20 years from now, their liver is going to be exploding on them. That's right. That's right. When they have seen even family members suffer, right? People who have a high rate of cancer in their families, and they just continue to do and smoke or do things. It's like, you saw all your family suffer and die from that, and yet you're involved in it. So that you had the information, you could see it, but not going to happen to me. So there's this kind of concept he's talking about. So we're going to go through the passages. If you got a handout back there. I do need to kind of hit a pause and discuss something that Renee brought up, because I think it is important that we look at. They're back over in Ecclesiastes 2, 7, and 8. We read this passage, and I need to kind of, address it because of some comments and things that we talked about, and I didn't really have a full recollection of it. The scripture is, I bought male and female slaves, and I had home-born slaves. I also possess herds and flocks larger than all who proceeded before me in Jerusalem. I also collected for myself silver and gold and treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men and many concubines. And it was again, this is where, the translations and the way that we would structure and say something can't always come out as modern as we think and talk. I mean, our language evolves. I don't know, what's the Gen X language? I don't know if it's even English. I've listened to some of them. No, I'm serious. There's like this abbreviation talk they use, and they will say certain things, and it's like they completely understand each other. I watched it on YouTube. It was a Gen Z conversation, and I swore they had a whole different language. I had no understanding of what they were talking about. So we know language develops and evolves. And so this is one of these where that last part there, pleasures of men and then many concubines. And it seems the structure, as we first take it, if you slow down, that is he possibly talking about homosexual relationship? That he participated in that? And probably because I never really dove off and looked at that, because I'd always seen it, taught or been taught it, that this was not that type of a sexual, intimate pleasure he's talking about, but more of the idea of other aspects. So I did some digging and looking at kind of the textual and linguistic background of it. And that key phrase there, when we look at it, the first word is delights, pleasures. The idea of son of men is an idiom for people. So when he says pleasures of men, which in Hebrew was more around the idea of people. And so he's not talking, so now it's not just male, female in that way we read it, pleasures of men, but pleasures of people. So now it starts to help us bring that out. If you look at all of what we call the ancient documents that the Hebrews had, the different manuscripts, the Septuagint, its meaning basically is court attendance, luxury service. The Targum was another translation manuscript. It says male and female singers and every kind of music, and it was leaning towards, again, musical, cultural entertainment. The Syriac one was, again, joy, celebration. The Rabbinic Midrash, which was another teaching during the Second Temple period, which is significant because when we say Second Temple, we're talking about from the time they rebuilt the temple out of Babylon. So from about 500 to when Christ came, well, actually from 500 to when the destruction of the temple is considered Second Temple period. And those scholars, those rabbis, are the ones who put together and translated the Hebrew Torah and brought it into the Greek, and it's called the Septuagint. Our Bibles are heavily rely on the Septuagint. And so that's actually what Paul and the apostles would have been kind of educated under and used as well. And that one as well, the meaning is points more towards like a royal type of kingly pleasures, and not immoral acts. And there has been several commentaries that ask that question, some scholars in the past, and basically that they do not, none of them have come up with the idea that it has anything to do with a sexual intimacy at all. But that was a fantastic question. Thank you, Renee.
Thank you.
Because those are the things that, you never know. I mean, that's the stuff that stumbled me, and it could have been in someone trying to defend homosexuality. Say, well, Solomon was the wisest man of the world, and he went off and did that. Especially whenever, I thought more about it, that one of the things we saw was a passage where he said that he kept his wisdom as he experimented all these things. And a lot of times we look at the book of Ecclesiastes and think that he went on a binge. That Solomon took off and went on the holy binge of pleasure. And remember, I told you, there's the sinful pleasure experiences, and then there's the ones that are not. And so Solomon is saying, he stayed within wisdom, which in other words, he would have known better. He didn't go out of control, he didn't go out of bounds, but he experienced all of them to the fullest. Every flavor of chocolate you can imagine, flew it in from around the world. Where me, I just get it at Pickwick, or Circle K. That's the best chocolate I might get. That's where because he could import chocolate from around the world, and I'm just keep saying that. You can tell I got a problem with chocolate, huh? Chili and chocolate. Those are my two. And that's what he's talking about. Things that you and I couldn't get a hold of and enjoy the best of. Yeah. Caviar. Has anyone eaten caviar, by the way? Yeah. I haven't either. So, see how you guys are? I tell you, man, you guys got no class. None of us do we? Well, he would have not only gotten caviar, but he would have got the most exotic caviar. That's what we're talking about. That's what Solomon said. If it was good and it was out there, I got it because I could do it. I had the money, I had the wealth, the power. I could make all these things happen. So this is where, and that's why it bothered me more and more when we looked at that and started thinking, if he's doing that, then that just wiped out what he said earlier. And so that contradiction kind of brewed around in my brain. So I did put it together. I know you one, and if somebody is interested in wanting to look it over. But I think we needed to kind of digress and talk about that. So let's go and jump back in and look at this. Let's start out with 12. We're in chapter 2, 12 and 14, the first part of 14. So I turn to consider wisdom, madness, and folly. For what will the man do who will come after the king except what has already been done? And I saw that wisdom excels folly, as light excels darkness. The wise man's eyes are in his head, but the fool walks in darkness. This is kind of like what we're talking about. But he's having kind of a profound moment, thinking, what's going to happen after I come? What will be done? We've all thought that. If you haven't, you're going to. What's going to go on? You know, I love the space race. I love space. And I think about when I grew up, you know, I was like 7, 8 years old when man landed on the moon. And I'm hearing the dates when we're going to be on Mars, like 2035. And I start going, I don't know if I'm going to be here. I'm like, what? You know, and I did. I just recently had that. I was watching it, and they're like, oh, we might not get there until 2035 or 2040. I'm like, man, I'd love to watch the first man walk on Mars, but I'm not going to be here. What's going to happen? You know, and so, and that's just kind of maybe a little bit of a silly one, but it's the things that we do. We kind of wonder. You know, I think about my family. You know, when I'm gone, what are they going to do? You know, and as a king, look at all that he had done. He goes, and basically he answers it, you know, it's like, it's basically, you know, going to be the same. And so then he looks as far as like wisdom. He definitely concludes that wisdom definitely is better than folly, foolishness. And he describes it as light and darkness. Isn't that an interesting thing that we see throughout the Bible, where God and prophets use this terminology because it's so easy to understand, guiding yourself through a dark room with no lights on versus guiding yourself through a dark room with light on. Just huge difference, right? And so it's a great one. He's just basically comparing the two and describing, but the fool walks in darkness. He walks without looking for a light switch. You know, it's like, I don't care. I don't need a light switch. I know this room. And then breaks his toes. You know, it's like, so that's kind of what he starts out with, is this idea. And definitely choosing wisdom, being circumvent with knowledge of living life, that's the best way. And nothing but trouble is going to come from living one in darkness like that. So, and yet I know that one fate befalls them both. Then I said to myself, as is the fate of the fool, it will also befall me. Why then have I been extremely wise? So I said to myself, this is vanity too. It's kind of interesting, you know, I mean, you know, sometimes don't you kind of have doubts? You know, I mean, I've lived such a disciplined Christian life, and I see how the world is enjoying their pleasures, and they're enjoying life and wealth and prosperity and all this, and I've tried to be diligent and faithful and excluded those things from my life in order to live wise and a better life, and then you're all going to die. You're going to have a funeral, the same. So that's where he says, again, stay with him, because he's not saying then just give up. Remember, I always want to keep this in the context that we're talking about a life without God. That's what we saw. He's already established that in the previous verses. But that's a good question. You know, I mean, why have I lived so wise and so smart and all these things, and yet the grave is the same place we're all going to end up. For there is no lasting remembrance of the wise man as with the fool, inasmuch as in the coming days will be forgotten. And how the wise man and the fool, they die alike. So I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me, because everything is futility and striving after the wind. Now, Solomon did have a period in his life that he did slide away from God. And especially when it came to the concubines who he permitted to bring in all the idolatry that of the foreign wives came in. And he started practicing them, not just, it's one thing to say like, well, you go to your church, honey, I'll go to mine. No, he actually involved himself in these practices. So there is a period I sense he's kind of bringing this out. It's kind of like, everything he did, we've already looked at all the wonderful things he worked and accomplished and built. And he looked back and he could not keep that satisfaction. That left him wanting as well. And I think this is where the old Solomon is sitting there looking around and thinking about how he had this wisdom and he's doing these things, but he had forgotten God. He had forgotten God. And so that made it, like he's saying at the end of it, grievous, depressing. You can't sustain yourself, It's like, I got to keep that good feeling, that self-worth in me. And so a lot of times we seek out that self-worth, but we're seeking it out in worldly accomplishments. We're wanting to find that satisfaction out there. Without God, again, is where we fall short. That's right. We get a gap. You may accomplish them, but you're going to be a workaholic, or you're going to end up being that type of person who's trying to gain it and keep it and hold that high from whatever it is. And then if you take a breath and you back off, you go, what's it really for? What have I done with all my life? And this is the missing factor again. And that's what we're going to look at. So he says, thus I hated the fruit of my labor, for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to a man who will come after me. So when he says under the sun, remember that? In this world. I hated the things that I was producing with my labor, which he didn't work a day in his life, I bet, because he's king, but everything he did with the laborers, everything he accomplished, and he had many incredible works. Gary, were you going to say something? Oh, okay. So, everything I'd worked in this world for, it's just going to be left. Somebody else is going to come behind me. I'm sorry, my mind's weird. Anyway, you guys know that. But it reminded me of this joke where this rich man had all this gold and he was on his deathbed. And he tells his servant, he goes, hey, go get all my bag, pack it. I'm dying tonight. Put it beside my bed, because when I die, I'm taking it with me. The servant said, well, so they bring all his gold and they set it beside his bed and he dies. And, the angel comes. This is a joke, right? This is not theology. This is totally a joke, okay? So don't take me serious. So anyway, angel comes to get him and he goes, okay, well, let's go, and he got his bags of gold and the angel goes, no, you can't take anything with you. Oh, come on. Okay, but I'm telling you, they're not going to let you in. So he gets up there and gets to the gates. St. Peter's standing there. He says, what do you got in the bags? Well, I got gold. Then he looks in and he goes, hey, boys, come here. He brought pavement. Because what are the streets, right? And is that what it is? I mean, it's kind of it's funny, but there's a part of it, it's like, and who are you going to leave it to? So everything that we have, that's why I think you see some empty nesters with bumper stickers that said, spending my kids' inheritances. Right? Like, we ain't going to leave them nothing. We're going to spend it now. I was talking to a friend of mine. He's retired and they're okay. They're okay, financially and stuff. And I'm like, what are you holding on to it for? Because I'm badgering him into buying a new mountain bike, right? Get your bike, Mike. You know, what's the deal? That lawnmower is like a Sherman tank. Come on, what are you going to do? Leave it to your kids? You know, I'm kind of like badgering. But just think about those conversations we have like that. What are we saying? We understand that whatever we have now, unless it gets burnt, you give it away now. But for the moment of your last, it's somebody else's.
That's right. Yep.
Probably most of mine's going to the Goodwill, but they'll probably haul it all off. But it's kind of depressing to think that. The things in which you valued so much, to the people who come behind us are going to look at it and go, yard sale. Throw it in the estate sale, right? I've gone to some estate sales, and I walk through, and it's almost sad. You look at this person's life. They've opened up their home, and all these things in the house, the photographs, the frames, the furniture, and there's been times where I'm serious. You get kind of depressed. I mean, you're looking for a bargain, but there's a part where you're scavenging through a person's life. And to me, it meant the cheapest price I could get. And when you buy it and you take it home, it has no value like it did to that person. You know, so it's kind of that idea. I hated the fruit of my labor. I looked at all the things that I had accomplished and go, it's just going to be given away. I'm not going to have any control over it. It's going to come to somebody who comes after me. Now let's talk about Solomon's son, Rehoboam. Rehoboam, in 1 year after becoming king, destroyed the kingdom. Destroyed it. Divided it. The 10 northern tribes split away because of heavy taxes. He had the wrong type of people advising him. He listened to the wrong ones. The old advisors who advised his daddy, Solomon, said, you know what, you need to slack off. Your daddy King Solomon was a tough man, and he excised a lot of taxes and burdens on people. You need to lighten up. No. Rehoboam stepped it up. You think my dad was tough? I'm going to be tougher. And within 1 year, divides the kingdom, squanders all the money because of what he did in creating that civil war, caused him to have to spend that money to try to get Egyptian army and different mercenaries and battle stuff to try to fight and just drove it away. So can you imagine if Solomon would have been alive and sat there and saw this? Everything that he had done to pass to his son handed him one of the most wealthy nations in the world, the most secure, peaceful, had the best relationships with nations around him, and in less than 1 year, destroyed it. So now he's not dead, so he doesn't know, Now he actually, close to the end of his life, he actually is told by God's going to do that to him because of his sinful things that he had done. So going on in 19, and who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. And his son was a fool, wasn't he? Yet he will have control over all of the fruit of my labor for which I have labored by acting wise under the sun. This too is of no value. This is vanity. And how prophetic, because this is exactly what happened to Solomon's stuff. Therefore, I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with them. This too is vanity and great evil. What do we call that? When somebody gets something inherited and they had nothing to do with it. But, you ever heard the term old money? People that are rich or wealthy, let's just say wealthy, a lot of times they'll say, well, mine's new money, or mine's old money. And old money means basically, like the Rockefellers. The Rockefellers, that was old money from back in the 1800s. And so all the Rockefellers up until, I know there's still some alive, but I know like in the 70s there was a Rockefeller that was a vice president. And he was of the Rockefellers. And he was where he's at a lot of ways because of his great-granddad. It was inherited. And that's the type of thing, is you give this down, this labor, to somebody who hasn't earned it. There's a huge difference, isn't there? You know, I had a cousin that got every vehicle given to him, and he totaled them all out before we were out of high school. When I was a sophomore in high school, I wanted a car, and my dad said, get a job. So I did. He helped me do the first down payment, and then I had to make all the payments. He got my insurance and got the first payment on the insurance, and then I had to pay them all. And there's a couple of times I had to go beg him and go, oh, I don't know if I could make that $40 monthly payment on the car, you know. But I'll tell you what, I kept that car until somebody finally hit me. I kept it because I'd earned it. I'd worked it. It was mine. I had blood, sweat, and tears in it. I had what they call skin in the game, right? And so that's the thing that he almost sees. It's almost like he sees it with his children, all that Solomon had accomplished, had they earned it? And I think he's kind of looking at his own family going, no, they haven't. They haven't really earned it. And so that caused it to have, he even goes to the point of saying a great evil. And I think there's some truth to it, you know, like I just described. You know, when people have absolutely everything handed to them, what's the other phrase? They're born with a silver spoon. That's somebody who has never had to work a day in their lives. There's a difference. And I'm not going to say it's sinful to have old money or to be in that, but it shapes the way you value things. And that's what I think Solomon is trying to say. Going on 22 and 23. For what does a man get in all his labor and his striving with which he labors under the sun? Because all his days, his tasks are painful and grievous, and at night his mind does not rest. This too is vanity. Whew, you ever get a little closer to home? You work hard in this world. You go home, your back hurts, your feet hurt, you've got headache, you're stressed out, and you try to go to sleep. And it takes you a long time to sit there and, you know, get all that out. And the first thing you wake up in the morning, if whatever sleep you got, you're going, oh, okay, here we go. And you get back into it, and, you know, where's my clothes, where's this? And I got to deal with that guy at work or this and that. And it starts again, doesn't it? It's like, and so there's no rest. You work hard all day, you exhaust yourself, and you go home, and guess what? You can't even get a good night's sleep because you're worried about it. Now, this is a life without God, okay? Because he's already established earlier that work is good. This is what God has established for us. But if you don't have him in your life, then this is what life becomes. Just get up, go to work in drudgery, and then come home and just go through that. We can't escape it. Just like with the fool and the wise man, you know, we're going to have to endure and work. We're going to have to go through that. That's natural. That's what God has established for us to do. And so this is where he brings in the concept we kind of talked about. There's nothing better for a man than to eat and drink and to tell himself that his labor is good. This is also what I have seen is from the hand of God. For who can eat and who can have enjoyment without him? There it is. There's nothing better. You may think maybe we could do without the backache and the feet, you know, but you know, there's something humbling about when your body hurts and but there's also something good too. At times, you know, when I've gone out and labored hard and you come home and you accomplished a lot of good stuff and you know you spent legitimate energy, good energy, even though it was difficult. And that's good. That's what God said. That's what he says. There's nothing better for us to do than to eat. In other words, that if you think about that, eating and drinking, that's a part of the pleasure, isn't it? You don't come home and drink spoiled milk. You go home and get good milk, don't you? Right. Yeah. You go home, you eat good food. You know, that's good. That's what he's saying. You enjoy the pleasures. Yes, enjoy it. And you need to pat yourself on the back. Pat yourself on the back. Because you're doing the right thing. You know, it's to work. And it comes from God. And then he brings it, nails it down by saying, but you can't have that enjoyment. See, that's where what he described earlier, everything I have is going to go to somebody else. I'm working all day and I can't sleep at night and all that. Well, you can't have enjoyment without him. It makes those things so much more pleasurable when you have God. So we're going to look at this idea, when he talks about that, is looking at the ability to experience joy. It's not related to what you're doing. I used to say this. I kind of came up with it when I was fairly young. I was working at the hospital. And I was kind of going through that Solomon mode, where you go to work, you clock in, and you start hearing all the stuff that's going on, and you got to go this and that. And then I just had a horrible day. And I was working in the emergency room, so you can imagine, there's days that were just like horrific. And you go back and I would check out and just almost roll the windows down and want to scream. You're just like so overwhelmed. And then the next day I went in, I clocked in, and it was 10 times worse. It was worse. And I went home and I was in the best mood. And I remember getting home going, what? What happened? We had more fatalities and death and all this stuff that went on than the day before. And you know what I figured out? The distance between my fingers. Right there. Right there. I started going, nothing, if anything, things were worse. So what right did I have to sit there and go home and be in a better mood than I was on a day that was less work? What changed? It had to be this. Now, maybe I ate better that morning. Maybe I had better coffee. I don't know. But I started to learn that a lot had to do with attitude. It really has a lot to do with that. And where do we develop this from, though? And primarily, it's from God. That's where we have the ability to have a difference in our mind, is from God. And there are things that we see when we experience this. When we talk about experiencing a relationship of joy, there's several ways. But, it starts out with salvation. How many times when you're having a bad day do you really understand the great value of your salvation? And does that not put into perspective some of the horrible things that may be going on around you? Because, like Solomon already pointed out, we're all going to the grave. We're all giving everything up. Everybody's giving everything up. But I'm not going to perish. I may die, but I can know that I have salvation. And so that helps set my mind in an attitude that's able to overcome and endure, because as you kind of say flippantly, ain't nothing but a thing. Ain't nothing but a thing. Just another day, you know what? I think that's why when you listen to Paul, when Paul in Corinthians and Ephesians, especially Corinthians, when he gives out that list of all the things that he suffered, I mean, they're horrific. And yet he said, what? He had obtained basically in Philippians a peace that surpasses all understanding. Now, how could he do that? In the same manner, Paul, when he looked at his life, like Solomon looked at his life and said it was all a waste. What did Paul say when he looked at his life and he saw all that he'd accomplished as being the Pharisee, being one of the most enlightened, sharpest minds in Jewish law? He looked at his life and he said, what? It was a waste in comparison to, in comparison to what? Christ. And that is where you're trying to wrap your mind around how can you endure a world around you that's rage filled with anger and sinful things and stress and all this. It starts with the understanding and the appreciation of the cross and holding that idea of salvation, because then we have hope. There's nothing worse than a hopeless person. There are people that have almost died because they were hopeless. They had no hope. I've seen it with people who, I've seen people come into the emergency department that for every biological and logical reason should have died, and they lived. I was like, how did they live? And then I've seen some come in and you think, it's not, they're sick, and they die. And now I'm oversimplifying, but then as years have gone on, dealing with more and more, especially when it comes to Christians and non-Christians, when somebody doesn't have salvation, when they don't have a hope, they're very, very terrified. They're very terrified. And it's a very frightening, and you cannot console them. They are anxious. I've gone to houses, where they're in hospice care and they want us to transport them, and I've done a lot of that. People very close. I've been there when people have breathed their last, both Christian and non-Christian. And I've seen this. And there is a huge difference between those who have a salvation and who have hope. You know why? Because the next thing, they have an insight. They have an insight. Now, the one thing that with Christians that are getting close to before they pass, you notice we use the word pass. We don't use the word perish. They're very similar in origin, but there's a difference. And to me, I think it's more appropriate in saying pass, because we just pass. What does that mean, pass? Now, if you're a football fan, you know what that means, right? You're throwing the ball, right? You're You're passing. You can laugh at me, but there's some reality to that definition, isn't there? So when we pass, as Christians, what are we doing? I call it a speed bump. It's a speed bump of life, because we're immortal now. We're everlasting. Why do I know that? Because I have salvation. I have hope in the Word of God. And that gives me this insight to understand. Now, the most terrifying thing, and this is also with some of those that were dying, the one concern that Christians have is it going to hurt? Right? If it ain't going to hurt, then, but that is the one thing. It's not the dying, it's because they know and they have hope and they have the insight and all this, but there is that idea of our physical body when we do this passing, that we have that fear, and that's legitimate. And I think that what's incredible, unless it's something traumatic that happens, but the body has a beautiful mechanism of the way that it processes through death. And if you ever go and study like hospice care and stuff like that, it's pretty phenomenal. And I have full confidence that the Lord is taking care of us, and we're not having that pain.
Yep, amen.
We see and we think that our loved ones as they're dying, but we're watching a shell. But we don't see that beautiful soul passing. And see, that's the difference in making our day, no matter what goes on around us, totally different from those who have no hope.
That's right, amen.
And what's it all built on? Love. The love that started with God. And that we can look at, know we have salvation, we have hope, we have this insight, but we have this love. And that love is what gave me salvation. And it wasn't because he liked me, it was because he wanted the best for me. That love he gave to me. And so that's the love that helps us also to endure what we're going through. Reshaping. Because again, it's natural. Somebody says something ugly to you, what do you want to do? Say something ugly back. You want to strike back. And even if you don't, let's just say you swallowed your pride and you just took it. What emotion does that spark in you, you see? It's sure not kindness. And it builds up. And what that does is it takes us away from the agape, which means, no, I should still care for that person. I know they don't know what they're doing. What did Jesus say hanging on the cross? Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they're doing. That is agape. There's been times when I've been in some of those horrific situations with somebody, and I don't say it out loud, and I almost sometimes think I'm being blasphemous, but I say to myself, forget them, Father, they don't know what they're doing. You know, they're so caught into that sinful attitudes that they don't even know what they're doing. And so those are the keys, I think, of being able to bring a relationship of joy in that way and starting it with him. So what do we see? We see one, it's with the relationship with Christ. And in that, we get our satisfaction, which then gives us this joy, love, and peace. So Solomon is saying that satisfaction, joy, and peace is from where then? The inside. The inside. You're not going to find it in the next best, greatest Jell-O chocolate or whatever it might be, or caviar, those things. Those are outside. Those are under the sun. Those are things that are in this world that he's been trying to really build up and show that there's nothing in this physical world that is going to be able to sustain my joy, my satisfaction without God. And all of those things that we talked about, you know, the hope, the salvation, the love, the insight, and the relationship with Christ is where? It's internal. It's a spiritual. That then makes everything sweeter. It's kind of like putting, you know, chili on anything. For me, I put hot sauce on anything. You know, when I was in the military, they give us these little Tabasco stuff. I could make anything taste good. Just put some of that on it. And that's our salvation. It can make anything so much different in the way that we experience it. So verse 26, for to a person who is good in the sight, he has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, while to the sinner he has given the task of gathering and collecting so that he can give to someone who is good in God's sight. This too is vanity and striving after the sun. This is what I've talked about before, where, you know, we see that the redistribution of the wealth that may be gathered by those who are ungodly, that end up God will redirect and take care of and use it. And I just can see that there has been times in my life where there are people who are very atheistic, agnostic, and yet they took care of me. They gave me stuff, they took care of me, they did things, and I would sit there and go, they definitely don't believe in my faith. They have nothing. And I'm just kind of showing it's in a microcosm. But that's what we looked at when we were looking at Isaiah in the prophecy of chapter 23 against Tyre, where Tyre was so rich and wealthy. One of the things he says in there is that he was going to let them come back, but all the wealth that they were using, he was going to redirect it to take care of his people. And so there is a part where we see that. So the essence of one's being or our existence really has to be rooted in that relationship with God. And so satisfaction is available to everyone. Solomon's point, regardless of what they do as work, no matter what level you're at. And joy and satisfaction is not a direct product, again, of your own work skills. It's not something. It must be something found in that relationship with God. And so the relationship then blesses, because of God, our work in whatever we choose to do. Okay, any closing thoughts, comments? All right, well, I hope you'll be able to join us next week, next Wednesday at 6 p.m. again. This Sunday morning at 9:45, we're continuing in the study of the Gospel of Mark, and it's getting good. And then Sunday morning worship at 10:45, and in the afternoon at 4 p.m., we're doing the study of Isaiah like I had mentioned earlier. So until we meet again, God bless.